I see some familiar faces. Good to see you guys. Been talking about you alone today. It's good to see you here. Okay, so we are here with Yaniv Sneor, and we will wait a few more seconds just to make sure that we have more people who would like to join us. If you can open your camera, it would be great so we can see you. As I said, if not, it's also fine. I see more people are in the waiting room, so we're just going to let them in. Okay. All right, fantastic. So as we go along, if more people will join us, I will let them in. But in the meantime, we have about an hour, and there's so much we can talk about in this hour, so I don't want to steal more time. For those who don't know me, hi, welcome. My name is Sharon Vanek. I'm the Executive Director of the California-Israel Chamber of Commerce, and I'm very excited to be here today. The California-Israel Chamber of Commerce, or in short CICC, is a nonprofit organization that is basically trying to bridge the gap between different entities in California and in Israel. Health innovation, life science is only one area that we touch upon, and I am very, very excited for having today Yaniv Sneor with us with Mid-Atlantic BioAngel Group. Hi, Yaniv. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thank you very much for having me with you. I think, by the way, the caption for my name is Sharon, so I may need to change the.
Do you know how to change it?
There
are 3 dots on the upper right side of your screen, and this is where you need to change it so we can have your real name. But it's fine; it happens all the time. Thank you, Yaniv, for changing it.
My pleasure.
All right. So before we start, I want to mention some house cleaning rules for the session today. First of all, for those who just joined, we do record the session. It will be later on available on our YouTube channel, so you can always go back and ask questions. Also, there is a chat box. Please use just this chat box to introduce yourself to other members of the group. You can include your name, your contact information, your LinkedIn page if you want. It's always nice. We can always distribute that, and people can find some other companies and colleagues to work with. We are going to conduct the next hour as a Q&A. So basically, we will start asking questions, Yaniv. And if you have any questions for him, please write them down. We will allow enough time at the end of the session for you to introduce yourself and ask questions directly. Really, the purpose of the session today is to learn more about Mid-Atlantic BioAngels and better understand what their interest is, what kind of check do they write, what position they would like to take, what's their appetite. But also to hear from Yaniv if he has any tips for Israeli founders or in general founders that are looking to raise funds from angel groups. So with no further ado, I want to really start with some personal background about Yaniv. So there's so much that we can tell you about Yaniv. I think I'll ask you to start.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for having me on today. So my background is as an entrepreneur. I have started and ran and turned around and purchased and sold a bunch of companies in the past. And at some point in my life, I became an accidental consultant because I wanted to start charging money for the things I was giving away for free. And at some point as well in my life, I recognized, along with a few other partners who have since retired, that when you want to invest in life science companies, it requires a certain combination of skills that are not generally found out there, and that in order to do a good job doing diligence, you really need to bring a whole bunch of different people with different skills together to be able to do that kind of diligence. And in the life sciences, it's a very specialized kind of these skills. So you have to understand the science, you have to understand the commercial, you have to understand the payers, which in the US is even more complicated than the rest of the world. And the regulatory, obviously. And so there's so many different things that come together that we decided to create a specialized group that focuses exclusively just on this area. And that allows us to also attract a membership from members who are primarily from within the industry in different roles, who are interested in doing that on a regular basis. So we are an angel group, which means these are individuals who write their own checks and do their own diligence and invest in exclusively life science companies. So that's therapeutics, devices, some diagnostics, and some digital health. And we invest all around the world. So we have invested in companies in Israel and in France and in the UK, but primarily we invest in companies in the US. So I know that we have other questions and other things we want to cover, so I'll leave it at that and happy to discuss further.
Great. So I think before we move on to talk specifically about Mid-Atlantic BioAngels, or in short, MABA, can you help those that maybe don't have that knowledge define what's the difference between an angel and a group of angels, and talk a little bit about how decisions are being made in your particular group, because there are different formats for decision making?
Sure. So as you said correctly, every group, there are a bunch of individual angels who basically lone wolves, people who are approached by people for funding, and they all, they often do that. They do their own diligence and provide it, and they provide their own money. We are a group of investors. So the benefit that we have is that we have the internal discussion, and we have different people with different expertise being able to contribute to those discussions and to making better investment decisions, in my opinion. Every group utilizes different tricks, techniques, whatever you want to call it. So one of the things that we do is that we have an internal fund, which we call a pool, and the majority of our members have put money into that pool. And every time that the diligence committee, so let me back up a little bit. A company comes and presents to us, and in some cases they move into diligence, in some cases they don't. If they do go into diligence, we create a special diligence room for it, a diligence committee, and we begin to have internal discussions. We send those questions to the company back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. We often have calls with the company. We often have internal calls to discuss it as well. And at some point, if we are still positive about it, we will then engage the entirety of the group that is also part of our internal pool. And the pool members need to review all the information the diligence committee created, and also will have to vote at the end of the day in a process that is open, so everybody can see how other people voted. And we also ask our members to write a paragraph that explains how they voted and why they voted that way. And that helps us keep the engagement level high within the group, make sure that everybody gets a chance to participate in that discussion, to voice their opinion, because, again, coming from the belief that the more people are involved in the decision, the better it is, the more likely we are to arrive at a good one, at a good decision. So that's how our group works internally. We have also created what we call a sidecar fund. There are a lot of people who told us, we really like what you're doing, but we don't have either the time or the expertise to be active members of the group. So for them, we've created a co-investment fund. It's a passive, blind co-investment, sort of an index fund that automatically co-invests with us whenever we make an investment, as long as that investment meets a certain threshold of criteria.
Thank you for that. And I bet, from everything that you told us, people want to know okay, so how do I reach to someone within the organization? And we are so lucky to have Yaniv here on the call today. So should we send you an email after that and you're going to be our champion? Is that the mechanism? I know it's not, but can you explain a little bit about the mechanism on how to approach the group and how to get to that stage?
Sure. So every group has their own preferences in terms of how they want to be approached. We have decided that our best mechanism is to ask companies to go to our website to look at our investment criteria, which I'm happy to explain here, and then to, if they are a match, to submit an application to the group. And then that gives an opportunity to our screening committee, which meets about once a month. It gives an opportunity for a much broader group to review and to discuss all the applications that came in. And we respond to every one of them. First of all, we confirm receipt, and then we respond to them. We either an invitation to present, or we tell them, or we ask them questions sometimes because we need more information, or we say no. And if we do say no, we'll give some general comments in terms of why not. You know, we don't want to get into an argument in terms of, you know, specific points, but we'll say things like, oh, you're too early, or this might require too much money, and we think this is not an angel deal, or a variety of things like that, just to give the company a certain idea in terms of what the mismatch was. And we do have a spot. The last question on our questionnaire, on our application form, is if you've applied in the past and we've rejected you, tell us what you've done to address those points. So we do encourage companies to apply to us in the future if they've applied in the past and they were rejected, as long as they can address the points that we have mentioned in the past. We like the fact that we ask people to apply sort of on a website in that way, because it democratizes the process. You know, it's not about who you know, and everybody from Israel understands exactly what that means. But also in the VC community, usually they want a warm introduction of whatever it is. We want to make sure that everybody has equal access to us, and it's a fair and transparent process, and we like that in that sense.
Thank you for that. I also know that you have a side mechanism that encourages companies to come and present and just receive feedback. Can you talk a little bit about that? Sure.
So on our website, by the way, bioangels.net, which I can share through the chat, or you can share or whatever, but it's bioangels.net. That is where you'll find our application, but you can apply for funding, or on our homepage, you can apply to receive feedback. So we have this series of events called First Pitch Life Science, which pre-pandemic, we used to do in person. We used to feed 150 people or so in some place in New York City, and people and companies would come to apply to pitch to us, get some questions from the audience and feedback from a panel of our investors. They would basically hear how their presentation was received, and we would give them feedback on that. So we've converted that now to office hours, as we call it, but it's still under the same idea of first pitch. Companies can arrange with us ahead of time, and we run these events as soon as we have enough companies waiting. And we run these, every few months, where companies pitch for about 10 minutes, and it's an open event, so other people can sort of listen in as well. And then there's a panel of our investors that will give the company feedback, and usually there's time at the end for people to ask us questions and for us to respond. But it's just it's a way for people to see the kind of questions that'll come up after they present, how, what we will be talking about, and it's very helpful for companies, we think.
Fantastic. So I have a follow-up questions to that process, the feedback process that you just talked about. Through your experience over the years and all the companies you've seen, over the years, Can you give us some tips, for example, of what will turn you on as an investor and what will turn you off when you listen to a pitch or when you read somebody's deck?
Sure. So let me first tell you the kind of things that we look for that will convince us or make us interested in investing to begin with. So one of the differences between angel investors and VCs is that, VCs do this for a living and this is their day job. And for us, this is not our day job. And what that also means is that we don't have the time or the bandwidth to run your company. So we want to, we're happy to obviously to get involved and to help. And, once we're investors, we have the same interest as you, as seeing you being successful, but we don't have the bandwidth to jump in and run your company. So our first and foremost criteria for investing in a company is the strength of that management team. And with that, we mean that there is somebody with an understanding of the commercial path ahead that is leading the company, or we like to say driving the bus, right? Somebody who knows how to monetize this science, how to make money from it, how to ultimately get to an exit that is driving this effort. That's first and foremost. The second thing that we look for are technologies that will change the standard of care. They'll be transformative as opposed to incremental. That carries with it a lot of different things, because it means if it's new and it's transformative, usually you have a stronger and broader patent portfolio. You can own more patent real estate, as we call it, IP real estate. And it will lead to potentially a larger exit. We're looking for companies that address markets that are large and growing, because those also will provide those larger exits. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for in those companies. When we look at your application, we want to also see that the dollar amounts that you will need to reach an exit are what we call angel friendly. So if you think about angel investors, private investors, as they're called sometimes, or in Europe and other places around the world, these are people who write their own individual checks, and then as a group, those checks combine to a certain dollar amount. For us, it usually means anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million per round, and we do expect to invest in future rounds as well. But usually, sometimes there's been more, sometimes there's been less, but on average, $250,000 to $1 million per round. And then when you go to raise money from angel groups, since especially in the life sciences, it's rare that any one group can fill in a round. We are very friendly with each other. So we'll reach out to other angel groups and we'll do what's called syndication. We'll say, hey, do you want to, we just invested money in this company. Do you want to look at them as well? And in a syndicated round where multiple angel groups jump in together to invest together, maybe you can do $5, $6, $7 million we've heard of. And then you go back to the lab, you've hit some milestones, and you come back after a year or two and say, we've done well, we want to raise another round. And we've seen companies do that in the angel world and maybe raise $20, $25 million or so before they reach an exit. There are, however, companies that will need 50 or 100 or 150 or more than that millions of dollars in order to reach an exit. That's not something that we can support. And if we get involved in any of those kind of investments, then those future large rounds are going to dilute us very heavily, to the point that we may never even see a meaningful return. So we try to actively avoid investing in rounds where we know that we may get diluted too heavily in the future. So we leave those VC rounds for the VCs, and we try to concentrate on those rounds and those companies that require all the way to exit dollar amounts that are friendly to angel investors and also on friendly terms, where we don't get crammed down, and then where we don't expect that we'll be crammed down in future rounds as well.
Thank you for that. And by the way, I do see the questions in the chat box, so please go on and put them, plug in your questions. We will address them in a few moments. I do want to ask you one more question, if you can clarify. I see, startups all day long, and many of them, especially in the very early stage, are looking for angel investors in the US. There is this notion that I need to have on my list, I need to have an angel investor from the US, it looks better. And there is something that we keep telling founders that are reaching out to us, that it's getting harder and harder to get the first angel investors to, as individuals, to invest money simply because of tax reasons. And it sounds different when I say it and when we can hear it from an actual investor. So can you speak a little bit about the reasons from tax perspective for an US-based angel to be more hesitant investing in a foreign company, not just Israeli, but in general?
Sure. So there are a bunch of issues, but speaking specifically about tax issues first and foremost, there is a Section 1202, as it's called here in the US, which basically for US investors who invest in a qualified C Corp, which is a certain type of corporation in the United States. So if they invest in a US C Corp and they hold that investment for more than 5 years, then they qualify to, then the returns on that investment can be tax-free up to a certain dollar amount. And that's a pretty large dollar amount. And it's a very nice incentive to have. Once you get a big check and you don't have to share it with Uncle Sam, and so everybody realizes that that's a very big benefit. So when we can't do that, doesn't mean that we won't invest, but it means that we'll be looking at something that when we're giving up an active benefit. That's number one. With companies in Israel, issues that we've seen as well is that the country wants to limit the number of people on the company's cap table, because if they have too many, then Israel considers that company to be public. And so we've seen companies in Israel request of us to limit the number of individuals on cap tables, whether it forces us to create a special purpose vehicle that puts all of those investors into one vehicle or not, but or they force a higher minimum investment, etc. Again, not because of anything that they did, but because of those are the requirements in the state of Israel. Another issue that we often see with investors with companies from overseas, we tell companies that you have to recognize that at some point, the U.S. market is going to be part of your commercialization plan. We know that a company will start to commercialize and consider their home market. In the case of Israel, usually the EU before they go to the US. But we want to see that companies understand what it takes to commercialize in the US market, because the US often represents at least 50% of some markets, and in some cases 70% of some markets, right? So we want to make sure that entrepreneurs understand the commercialization process in this country and how it would affect their exit path. And we find that many entrepreneurs don't understand that. They understand their local market, but they don't understand the US market. And usually the way we would respond to them in screening is by saying, you're too early. You haven't gotten to the point that you understand what it takes to commercialize here. So those are a few comments about companies that are applying from overseas.
Thank you, Yaniv. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. What are you interested in? If you can tell us a little bit about what MABA is interested in terms of, let's start by talking about the stage of the company. Are you looking at very early stage, seed, round A? What stage are we talking about?
Yeah, so we've had an active argument inside the Angel Capital Association community. I'm a member of the Data Analytics Committee in the ACA. What does it mean to be pre-seed, seed, round, A round, etc.? I think it's a lot of confusing nomenclature in terms of what it means. So for me, what it means, and I'll speak for myself. I see a couple of members from our group on the line. They might disagree with me, but for me, first and foremost, we don't invest until the company is commercial ready, which means if it's a professor in a dream or a postdoc in a dream, and it's great science or whatever it is, but there is no commercial person on board and there is no articulation of the commercial path ahead, it's too early for us. We need to know that there's somebody driving the bus. We usually need to see enough data that people who are familiar with the industry, familiar with the commercial environment, will say, okay, there's enough here to evaluate this from a commercial perspective. We usually want to see some form of proof of concept. If it's a device, there needs to be a proof of concept that's already out there. We're not NIH money. We're not foundation money. That's discovery money. We're commercial money. And once we come in as commercial money, we have commercial interests. We want to see a return on our investment, and that'll happen usually if you are able to exit through an M&A. Some people come to us and try to impress upon us that they'll be going out through an IPO. And my opinion is if you're in such an exciting environment with such an exciting opportunity and science and technology, then somebody's going to buy you before you become too expensive by going public. So the M&A route is the preferred route for me, for us, for an exit. You can't predict it, but you can certainly hope for it, especially if you're producing something that's of interest. So I hope I've answered that question.
Great. So presumably we are in the right stage approaching. We go through the process. Can you talk a little bit about the size of the check that the group is typically investing? If you can talk a little bit about past investments that you have, like how many investments you do per year, and then the follow-up question will be, what do you expect to see in return? Are you taking any? You mentioned that the group it consists of individuals that actually have a day job. So are you taking any board seats? Are you looking to be more involved in return to that investment? So that's a follow-up question.
So I'm going to forget part of your questions by the time I go through all of this. So please remind me what I forgot. Let me start with some numbers and some processes, whatever. Of every 100 applications we receive, we only invite 23 companies to present in person. So 77 drop out in that first pre-screening call, just so you know. Of those 23 that make it in front of the group, maybe 16 move on to diligence. And of those 16 that presented, maybe 2 to 3 receive funding. Pre-pandemic, it was closer to 3. Post-pandemic, we're at about 1.56 companies for every 100 receiving funding. We can talk about it later why. It is what it is. That's our ratio. So we have to do a lot of work to find companies that we end up investing in. And I can tell you that I sympathize with everybody here potentially on the call, because during my day job, I run a small biotech company, and I spend my days hearing no from all the funding sources that I apply to. So I completely understand what it's like to be on the other side as well. And I'm too early for my own group, by the way, just so if anybody ever asks. So, and it's important to know where you are in the stage of your company and what kind of money you should be looking for, right? So I know where I am. We invest anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million per round. especially as our membership grows and our sidecar fund grows, we try to bring to the table more and more money. And as the membership group grows, we try to now engage more and more with companies. So until now, we've said to companies, look, we've written you a check, we've given you money. How can we possibly help you to be successful? But CEOs get busy and they forget to reach out to us. And what happens usually is they reach out when they need money, but they forget to reach out when they need help, when they forget to reach out for specific resources. So we are actively discussing within the group how we can do a better job of staying in touch with the companies on a proactive basis, reaching out to them on a monthly or quarterly basis and say, hey, how are things? How is the plan for clinical trials? Have you had discussions with the FDA? What's the responses? Do you need assistance with this? Do you need assistance with that? So, you get different answers when you ask more questions and you ask them more regularly. And we will try, and we want to try to do that more on an active basis as well. We also want to increase our involvement in terms of the information, the quality and the amount of information that we receive from companies. Usually they just send us quarterly reports, and some of our members often take board seats with companies. You have to remember that a board seat creates a fiduciary responsibility and a personal liability for that individual with the company. So we can't force anybody to say, you must be a board member in this company. And we have to also, and that person has to make sure that they have the adequate protection from that company, the proper D&O insurance and other things that protect them as individuals. And then some information that they might receive from the company, they are not allowed to share with us. So that puts them also in a situation where they have to figure out what's the right thing to share and what they can and what they can't do. But we do want that person and that individual to be a conduit between us and the company to help the entrepreneur be successful and to keep our group engaged. And this is a process of continuous improvement within the group, but it is garnering a lot of discussions right now. And as we grow and as we try to engage with more of our companies, to make sure that we're all driving towards the same outcomes. And that begins with good communications between us and the investors. And then, we're interested in providing the help to get there. And then it all comes to that relationship and what, and what life throws at you, et cetera. Hopefully I've answered a whole bunch of your questions. Not sure I answered all of them.
No, you're doing a great job. And actually, one of the questions that we had in the chat somehow relates to that. There was a question from David about, you ever been in a situation when you saw a company, you really liked the technology, you really liked what they're doing, you didn't like the people, and you just mentioned, Yaniv, that you like to offer your help as a group and say, okay, there are enough people here with expertise. You can do better if. Have you ever been in a situation like that?
Too often we've been in situations like that. We've had situations where we went back to the company and said, we like the science, we like the market, come back when you have a new CEO. Not only that, we said, we will give you a chance, an automatic chance to present again in front of the group when there's a new CEO. They didn't have to go through pre-screening again. They didn't have to do anything more. The new CEO had to reach out and say, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to present. So we've done that. All of our discussions involve evaluating the CEO. If we don't like them, that's going to make it very difficult for the company to continue in diligence. Very difficult. Usually it's a deal killer because if you have issues with people when you start and then you give them money, you're going to have more issues. So we really, really try to avoid that. We have the difficult situations are actually with people who are really nice, but they just don't have the skills to run the company. And how to say it gently that, you need to fill in the management team, whatever it is. And there's an active argument within the group. Is it just a matter of putting in enough coaching to help them to get to the end? But maybe if they don't have enough of those instincts, then not enough coaching can get them there to the finish line. We argue about that a lot, depending on the company. And we've had situations where we had a company that we really loved the management, and we really loved the market, and we knew that it would be binary. We had a situation where all the models, all the animal models in that in specific indication are not predictive. And so, but the company did everything right, and they got all the data, even though we know that the data may not be predictive, but we still invested in them because we thought that these are the right people to take this technology, and that they're doing everything right, and it could be binary, but if anybody would succeed, it should be them. So we have invested in them.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Pretty often I get, I talk to people and I hear about some differences between East Coast and West Coast investments. So you're sitting on the East Coast, we are in California, we are West Coast. We have some people here on the call, they are from the other side of the world. Can you talk about this a little bit? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, on the East Coast, we're considered to be very conservative. And I guess we are. Our understanding of the way that we on the East Coast look at them on the West Coast is that you could go into certain cafes and restaurants on the West Coast in the morning and have a bunch of meetings with VCs or angel investors and come out at the end of the day with checks. On the East Coast, or at least in our group, it'll take a few months of diligence before we write you a check. So I think that I don't know if it's just because of the industry that we are in. Certainly that creates a certain level of diligence, in my opinion, that is higher than just, if you are in a tech startup and, I like to say that a couple of kids came up with an idea over a weekend with enough beer and pizza, maybe it's something that somebody can fund over a lunch, but I can't see a therapeutic or a device company that we could invest in a day. When I have companies applying to us and saying, hey, we're about to close the round, we have a couple of weeks, are you interested? I tell them, no, I'm sorry, but come back to us before your next round, give us enough time to review it, to go into diligence. And the longer the diligence lasts, the more likely it is that you get a check, because we try to get to the no quicker. So, but still, it's a process. It could take about 3 months, from the first time you present to us until we write you a check.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock, and I do want to leave some room and time for questions from the audience. I have a last question for you. As a group, do you see, or does it affect you? People talk about the current, global slowdown in general in terms of investment, and I see some of the names here and some of the people on the call. Some of them are looking for first investments, some of them are looking for follow-up investments. I had some conversations with people. They feel that investors are sitting on the fence in terms of, let's see what's going on around the world. Can you tell us what's your take about it, and does it influence you?
Sure. So the pandemic introduced, or whatever happened during that period in terms of valuations, et cetera, there was a lot of money, there still is, but there was a lot of money sitting on the sidelines waiting to invest in fewer and fewer companies. And what happened is, it's a swinging pendulum, right? And so more money was chasing fewer companies, and so it became a seller's market, and companies were raising more and more funds. It was easier and easier for them to raise money, and the terms became friendlier to the companies as opposed to investors. So I'll give you examples. I was talking to a company that I really liked in Finland, and they were raising a $4 million round, and they said to me, we were talking to these VCs, and they said, why are you wasting your time with this $4 million round? Let me give you 40, and you just get it over with, right? And it was difficult for them to say no, even though there are differences. Obviously, when you get money from VCs, you give up control of your company. There's a whole bunch of differences between angels and VCs, but it's hard for them to say no for $40 million. That kind of money has disappeared in the last year. The other thing that we saw is a lot of companies trying to raise money from us on what's called a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity, SAFE. We hate SAFEs because the way to get to that simple agreement is take out all the investor protections. And so it makes no sense for us to invest in a SAFE. And by the time you negotiate a SAFE, you end up with an agreement that looks like any one of the other agreements that we would invest in when we invest in the convertible notes. So we've said no to a lot of SAFEs in the last year, and we've seen huge valuations that we didn't believe would allow us to make money. So ultimately, when somebody comes to us to raise money, we look at the risk profile, and we look at how much we think they'll need to get to that exit. And we look at what they're raising in the current round and what their valuation is post money, and then we look at what that expected exit will look like in terms of comps. I know that everybody on this call is unique, but there are similarity in terms of some companies that sold in your space, at what stage they sold, for how much money they sold, etc., and what the process looked like. And so we try to compare that to our knowledge of these kind of deals and to see what kind of exit we're likely to receive, what kind of return on our investment, and is it commensurate with the amount of risk that the company currently presents. If you come to us with a lot of data, in humans, and you already have some commercialization, whatever it is, we'll likely take a lower exit multiple because we know that the potential risk is lower. But if you come to us earlier, we expect to have potential higher exit because the risk is higher. So that's how we look at it in that sense. So the pendulum is swinging to the other side now. The companies that are applying to us are beginning to reduce their valuations to more normal stages to what we used to see before the pandemic. The agreement terms are again being more investor friendly. I don't believe that with a pendulum being completely on any one side. I think a balance is what makes sense, right? The investors have to feel like if they're comfortable with the risk. The entrepreneurs need to be happy with the terms that they're working under, and everybody needs to feel that they're well compensated and that ultimately we all make money when the company exits. So how do we get to some kind of a fair deal that we could all cross the finish line together in a fair way, and that we all get rewarded for the risk that we took?
Thank you for that. Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes, and I want to open the floor for questions from the crowd. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. I'll let you in. If you can just state your name, the company, your position, and then go on with the question. Bill, I see your hands is up already.
Yeah, hi there. Hi, Yaniv. Nice to meet you. Hi, I'm Bill Haynes, CEO and founder of Somnial. We're developing an alternative CPAP therapies. We're using a patch-based system that stimulates the nerve that controls the tongue. And we've already gotten some clinical data. And now we're making some devices to start sending home with patients and get a little more data. So, we have a chance to kind of be a platform technology with our approach to, we're using electrical stimulators, and we have some really proprietary technology in that field. What is your view of things like this, where it's we've got one very discrete, great product where sleep apnea is a huge market and it's going to be a great product just for that. But we've got a lot of other products that we could probably use at the same time. So what's your thinking on an approach to something like that?
Yeah, so you've asked multiple questions. One of them is the difference between a single product versus a platform and how to approach that. The other thing is the sleep apnea market. So I'll answer the sleep apnea market first. It is actually, there's a third question there, which is direct-to-consumer versus non. So we do not invest in direct-to-consumer products simply because the cost to convert these users into customers is very expensive and usually beyond what Angels can provide. That feeds into the second part of the market, which is it is a crowded market, and there have been multiple applications and multiple products in that market trying to address the same issue. And so now, potentially, when I look at an application, I haven't seen your application, I look at when we say, well, is there enough intellectual property there, and is there enough uniqueness, and how much differentiation is there going to be between what's currently in the market and what's yours? And I'm not asking the question of you right now because we don't have the time to engage in that discussion. Yep. But if we review this in screening, we will say, well, there have been tens, if not hundreds of potential solutions to this. You see commercials on TV for this all the time. I've been pitched at least 15, if not 20 of these in the past. And so it is a very competitive marketplace. And how is it different? What are the payers paying for it? How will you differentiate yourself? And those are issues when we consider investment, because it'll affect adoption. It'll affect time to adoption. It'll affect the dollar amounts you need, and will ultimately affect your exit as well. So when you come with a platform, what we want to see is that you've considered all the applications that you have for that platform and have selected that killer app. What's the best first one to proceed with, because for whatever reasons, you have the best adoption, the least amount of time or cost to market, or whatever it happens to be, is the best path to move forward. And that's the one that we will also react to when we review your application in terms of, is this the right market? Is this the best application? Why are they going with here when they could have gone with that, et cetera, et cetera. So there was sort of three different responses to that combination question.
Great. Thank you, Yaniv. Thank you, Bill. Adi, I see you raised your hands.
Hi, and thank you, Yaniv and Sharon. It's been very interesting. I'm Adi Diner. I'm the CEO and co-founder of iFocus Health. We're changing the way we understand brain health by making a tool that makes it possible to measure treatment efficacy from home. And we're starting from ADHD. When we have a tool that uses the webcam we're all using right now to measure if your treatment is working. We have a study from 100 users, and we show it's working. We actually have launched a beta last week. But one thing I'm hearing from many angel groups in the healthcare world is we want more data, we want more proof of concept, which is always a challenge because you need money for that, right? So what type of proof of concept do you need to make you comfortable to invest?
So actually, I'll ask you different questions. I'll ask you, who's going to pay for it? Because in the US especially, if nobody's paying for it, it's not going to be adopted. And if this is direct to consumer, that's an even more difficult challenge. So the first issue that we would focus on as investors is, what is the adoption going to be like? Are you going to now have all of these doctors who prescribe a certain prescription, a certain course of action, have to be glued to their monitor and watching all these people and to see what the outcomes are? And if they're not, what's the liability for them for not spending all that time while they have this tool that they're not reviewing the outcome? So you need to think about how your technology fits into the standard of care. The issue with diagnostics for us has been, we have not been investing in many diagnostics for two main reasons. Number one, adoption. how does it fit into standard of care has become a real challenge here in the US. Again, who's going to buy it? Who's going to pay for it? And the second problem for us has been that the exits in the diagnostic space has been very small. And so we take this big chance on it. And if we do succeed, we get a very small return on our investment. And so combine that with adoption risk, we usually don't invest in those kind of things. So it's up to you to solve that riddle, to figure out how all those things come together, who's going to pay for it, how is it going to work, how that exit is going to look like, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can convince us that there's money to be had and there's adoption to happen, then you'll probably get more interest from potential investors.
So a quick follow-up question for that, and I think, of course, you're not the first one to ask me this question, and they do have answers. What happens in a lot of these spaces and these tools is to get insurance coverage, and there are very good reasons for insurance to cover it. Now the doctors don't need to look at the screen; they're saving time because they don't need to have long conversations with users. They see a report, like they'll see your blood test or your blood pressure measurements, rather than talking to you and see how you're feeling. It's always faster. But the way to get adoption from insurance is to show them ROI, right? They want numbers. And the way to get ROI, there are two ways. The traditional way is big, expensive pilots, or you have a faster and cheaper way, in my opinion, if you are in a space that has a lot of out-of-pocket, that you can go directly to consumers to collect this data. So not as a scaling strategy, but as a data collection strategy, which is what we're doing. Now, the issue with that, it's working, people want it, everything is great. The issue with that I can't come to you as an investor today and tell you I talked to 10 insurance companies and this and that happened, because I need the data to come to them. I know that if I don't have the data in my hand, that I can show that people have less appointments, see less experts, less cycles, it's cheaper, because that's what they care about, then I will waste everyone's time, and I don't want to do that. So right now I'm raising money to get to that point. And that's why I'm looking for angel investors, because I know VCs are more conservatives typically.
Not necessarily. I mean, if we invest in 1.6% of applications, I think that we're just as conservative as any other professional investor. And let me make that distinction, right? What I think that perhaps you should be looking for different kind of money, right? There is exploratory money, the kind of money that you need to create the data and to validate the efficacy of a technology before you go and raise the commercial money. And I think that maybe you're too early for the commercial money and you're still in the exploratory data, which means go to the foundations and go to the NIH and go to other things that allow you to do that.
I have a product in the market.
You need data, though. You need to convince people that there's going to be adoption, and you'll have to figure out how to get that money. But
So I'm honestly a bit confused here. Not only about our product. This is an issue that whether you have whichever product you have in biotech and medical devices, until you get to the point that you can have data that people are buying it, the foundation money is not enough. You can't raise, there's not enough money there, the cycles are too long. You could be a great company, but if you only rely on developing your product, if you're not in the academia and you're only relying on foundation money to raise capital, you won't be able to scale fast enough. So who's investing in that space?
You need to get different money to get to different stages.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. And we would need to feel comfortable with adoption and the fact that there will be adoption, that there will be enough of an exit before we consider an investment. So it's up to you to figure out where to get the money to get to the point that you could convince us that there is a commercial case here and that we're going to receive a return on our investment. We only invest at that stage. And if you're still unsure, then you're too early for us.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can't hear you, Sean. Someone, we can't hear you. Lana, go ahead.
Thank you. My question would be, let me introduce myself first. So I'm Lana Voloch. I'm co-founder and CEO of Exoprother Medical. And that is a transformative oncology biotherapy targeting p53 mutant cancers. So that would be about 60% of cancer cases. And we are approaching this decades-old problem in a unique way. So the company is in preclinical stage. We'll definitely go through your criteria, very impressed by the group and the professionalism, and hopefully we'll have a point to meet. My question would be, in terms of rounds, so obviously many times the check size that you just mentioned, the range, is not enough to make the round, right? How do you position yourself in that round? Do you lead ever? Do you syndicate with other angel groups? What if we have already VC on board, but actually they are very much willing us to bring more players to the table for the next round? What is your thinking about that? Or is it on a case-by-case round? Are there any no-nos that you just don't do, and so on and so forth?
Sure. So first of all, I'll answer questions you didn't ask. Please don't use the word transformative, revolutionary, groundbreaking, whatever it is. It doesn't add to anything that you're saying. Number two, if you're an oncology-based company or a focused company, most likely, unless you're going for some kind of rare indication, we are not the kind of money for you. You're going to need VC money. And as I mentioned before, if you're going to need VC money, we don't want to be anywhere close to you. So you skip us completely and go to the VCs, because when the VCs come in, they're going to cram us down. They're going to dilute us too heavily to the point that we don't receive any money. So we're not the right money for you. To answer the questions in general that you asked, we can lead and we can also follow on around. We don't insist on leading necessarily, but we can. We don't insist on board seats, but sometimes we get them, or sometimes we get observer seats. We need to have some kind of a relationship with the company so that some does happen. We ask for it, but we don't necessarily insist on that. So does that answer the questions you asked?
You did, and I will follow up there. So oncology space obviously needs a lot of capital, absolutely understood. There might be indications where indeed there is so much needed and the return on investment is potentially limited, so it doesn't make sense. Very much understood. In the case where we are talking about really 60% of cancer cases, the return might, whether the return might still make you consider, or you would say, skip it completely.
It's not about the return. It's about the fact that when you go to raise your $50 million round, those investors who give you that $50 million are going to insist on preferential treatment, on on rights that are are above ours. They're going to dilute us to a point where here we are taking very high risk at a very early stage in your company, and we're going to end up with potentially no return. So it's not the market that's going to screw us, it's the VCs. So that's why we try to stay away. Still can't hear you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Someone, I can't hear you. We still can't hear you at all. Do you want to type into the chat maybe, and we'll respond somehow to the questions that you have? Can't hear you. We're out of time, right? Thank you, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you all coming to the call today.
Thank
All
you
the
so
best.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I see some familiar faces. Good to see you guys. Been talking about you. I see some familiar faces. Good to see you guys. Been talking about you alone today. It's good to see you here. I see some familiar faces. Good to see you guys. Been talking about you alone today. It's good to see you here. Okay, so we are here with Yaniv Sneor, and we will wait a few more seconds just to make sure that we have more people who would like to join us. If you can open your camera, it would be great so we can see you. As I said, if not, it's also fine. I see more people are in the waiting room, so we're just going to let them in.